There are some polls coming up in West Virginia, and they're kind of splitting the difference. The racist models are suggesting he should win in a landslide because there are few blacks, whereas I actually think a better projection ought to be Clinton by about 10 or 15. That's right. I think that if you actually analyze the demographic data properly, you end up with Clinton with a large lead in West Virginia. Um, she did win West Virginia by a large margin in 2008, and there's no logic in suggesting that Sanders is picking up racist voters the way that she did then. Um, if anything, there's logic in Clinton picking up those racist voters because Sanders is the visible minority here, not Clinton, right? The polls I've seen are in the margin of error, suggesting a split, but they're also small samples and wonky sources. Forget how many blacks are in West Virginia, okay? It's not a smart way to go about this. Instead, let's look at how she did amongst whites in the neighboring states, okay, all of which were open primaries. So, if what you're saying is that there's less blacks in West Virginia, therefore Sanders is favored, that must mean that all the white people in West Virginia would vote for Sanders, right? That's what you're implying. But in actual fact, if you look at the states around West Virginia, you see that 57% of whites voted for Clinton in Virginia, 53% of whites voted for Clinton in Ohio, and that number increases as you move to the south. 57% of whites voted for Clinton in Tennessee, and while Kentucky hasn't voted yet, Clinton won all of the counties in the south of Indiana, which border on Kentucky, and I see no reason to think that you won't see comparable numbers in Kentucky as well. 55, 57, 60% of whites voting for Clinton. Um, so, if your implication is that West Virginia is mostly white, therefore should support Sanders, why exactly do you think that? There's there's no logic in it at all. Okay. You could say something about class, maybe. I think that that would be your better argument. But I really don't think that whites in West Virginia are any worse off than whites in Tennessee or the south of Ohio. I know that it's an economically disadvantaged area, um, and it is a better argument, but if you're trying to base it on demographics, it seems like poor whites in the area around there are voting heavily for Hillary Clinton, not for Bernie Sanders, because it's the South, right? And Southern whites are very conservative. They tend to vote based on social issues, not economic issues. So, issues like, um, Sanders has been very outspoken for his early support for gay rights, um, stuff like that. Clinton is not as progressive. Um, in fact, until recently, see, let's remember that back in 2008, Hillary Clinton was opposed to gay marriage, right? In 2008, Sanders was in favor of it, or in favor of allowing it, right? Um, so it's perilous to transfer over one way or the other, but I really don't see how. I mean, I'm not So there's two levels of disagreement here. Okay, the first is that I don't like the idea of demographic modeling in the first place. I don't think that there's a way that you can have demographic modeling that isn't racist, unless you have something like in 2008 where it's like a unprecedented situation. At that point, there was clearly massive identity voting, right? Um, this, but in general, like the idea that your skin color or your ethnic background or your language or your gender is going to imply that you should vote for a specific, that's it's irrational. It makes no sense. Okay. Um, so that's the first. Like, I don't like the idea. Okay. But even if I did like the idea, the data in that region does not imply what the models are suggesting. The data in the region actually implies that because West Virginia is composed of Southern conservative whites, Clinton should be favored. So I'm at a loss to actually understand why it is that the models are projecting what they're projecting. Um, the way I understand it is that the model, what the models or most of the models do, is they just simply measure the percentage of blacks, right? They forget about everything else. So if you have a state that has lots of blacks, then they favor Clinton, and if you have a state that has less blacks, then they favor Sanders. It has not been very accurate at all, and West Virginia, I think, is a state where you're going to see that it's very, very inaccurate, or at least that was my thinking for most of the last several months. But I am data driven, and I am going to acknowledge that I haven't seen a poll with Clinton leading. Now they are small polls. Everything is within the margin, right? We've seen very inaccurate polling. Let us not forget that there really was. I don't think I saw a single poll with Sanders winning in Indiana either, right? So we can't put too much faith in polls by sketchy companies with sample sizes under 1,000, right? It's just the polling is not very good. Okay, so but I am data driven, right? So I'm going to suggest a way out, and it's just simply that shit happens. People do change, right? Again, I do think some skepticism is in order with the polling. We really don't have anything solid right now. But if Sanders does win West Virginia, what I would suggest is that implies that voting intentions in the South have shifted since March. So it won't demonstrate the correctness of the models, right? And this is the problem I've been having this entire primary season, is that I keep pointing out, okay, this is actually not logical. Okay, this does not follow, Y does not follow from X, right? Your models don't make any sense. But then some other thing happens and it ends up working out, right? So for example, you had all of those closed primaries on the 26th. And what the closed primaries did was they approximated the conditions that were false, or that would have been false if it was an open primary, right? So they managed to get it right by accident, right? And I mean, I'll acknowledge that in the South, race can act as a proxy for ideology, because black Democrats in the South are conservative, right? Everybody knows that. But black Democrats in the North, the liberal ones, white Democrats in the North, aren't registered that early, right? A lot of them are independents. So you had an open primary in the South and a closed primary in the North, and it approximated itself, right? But it's just a fluke. And I think that you might be seeing the same thing about to happen in West Virginia. Okay. It's not going to demonstrate the correctness of the models so much as it's going to imply that it's very perilous to try to make projections that far into the future because people change their minds, right? What I think it will actually do is collapse the validity of the data that you're using to make the predictions. Right? And this is I understand I'm talking to a very small audience right now. Okay, most people are gonna they're gonna laugh this off, right? She has an explanation for everything. Well, look. Let me flip that here. Look. Does that make it look to you like the data predicts a strong result for Sanders in West Virginia? I mean, you don't need a math degree to realize that it doesn't, does it? And it really doesn't, okay? I do agree that you should see the number of whites that vote for Clinton in West Virginia to be somewhere in that 50 to 60 neighborhood, right? I will agree that there should be some consistency because that area is very demographically similar to itself. Which means it's ideologically similar to itself, right? Those are mostly, Ohio's a swing state, sort of. I think the truth is that Ohio has been voting mostly Republican for a while now, and you should probably expect Ohio to vote mostly Republican into the future. Everybody's been very disappointed in Ohio for the last couple of decades. Maybe it's time to kind of get with it. It's the same thing with Tennessee, right? Clinton won Tennessee twice. In fact, let us not forget the refrain from 2000 that many people pointed out, which was that if Al Gore had won his home state of Tennessee, it wouldn't have mattered who had won in Florida. He would have won. But Tennessee has actually voted Republican very consistently since then. And Virginia is moving the other way, right? There's been I think they voted for Obama the first time. But I mean, you have to expect that it's going to. It might vote Democratic once in a while, kind of thing, but you have to expect that it's mostly a red state. And frankly, I think Clinton can win all three of those states if she's running against Trump, right? I don't think any of those states are going to vote for Trump, right? Excuse me. But and West Virginia was it was a Democratic stronghold for a long time, but it's been pretty solidly red recently, right? And it's the same same group of poor whites that are broadly socially conservative and economically socialist, right? That's the combination in the region. So, yeah, I do agree that you really should expect consistency. The number of whites that vote for Clinton in West Virginia should be roughly comparable to the number of whites that voted for Clinton in these other states, which says between 50 and 60 and probably closer to 60. So if they do the results, if they do the votes, and it turns out that it's the other way around, that Sanders gets 55% of whites, then that doesn't, what that suggests is that the voting intentions for whites in Virginia and Ohio and Tennessee has likely shifted, has likely changed. And that if they had a vote today, you would see the number of whites that vote for Clinton in Virginia and Tennessee and Ohio to be more similar to the number that end up voting for Clinton in West Virginia. So not only does it not prove the model correct, it proves the data that it proves that the data that you plugged into the model is wrong, or not current, right? Like I say, I know I'm talking to a small audience here, but trust me that I make sense, and that small audience will understand me. Okay. I understand this is likely a fruitless request, but I'm going to put it out there. If you were to do some rigorous polling in Tennessee or Virginia today, what would the results be? Because I'm telling you that if Sanders wins West Virginia after he just won Indiana, even keeping in mind the caveat that Clinton won all of the southern counties that were bordering Kentucky, and then is then at least competitive in Kentucky. I haven't seen a single poll in Kentucky. It's hard to see how the results from the early primaries can be current, which is what I'm saying. I agree that you should expect consistency. So if there's not consistency, you have to explain that, right? And you want to go with the newest data. I mean, you surely can't argue that the vote in West Virginia was wrong, right? It was yesterday, right? It actually hasn't happened yet, but you see what I'm saying, right? You would have to argue that the earlier results from the primary are not consistent with current results. Again, if you want to take the information you have and apply it to West Virginia, you should get a big Clinton win. And if Sanders does win, it strongly suggests that Southerners, or at least white ones, are actually abandoning Clinton. But I'm going to be completely honest. Let's not get carried away, because I actually still expect Clinton to win in West Virginia and in Kentucky. You're looking at small sample sizes. All of them are within the margin. There's not a lot of strong evidence to suggest that Sanders is ahead. And like I say, the demographics actually really strongly favor Clinton. I want to point something else out, though, and I pointed this out with the Indiana win. I think that the fact that it's an open primary. Well, wait a second here. See, in Indiana, Cruz was still running, right? So it's an open primary. What an open primary means is that people can go to the voting station and vote for both parties. So if you're a big Trump fan You can go and vote for Trump and Sanders. Now, everybody knows that Trump was getting turnout up. He was pulling in lots of independents, all that kind of thing, right? And I do think that that may be the actual reason that Sanders was able to win in a state like Indiana. You'll note that, in fact, all of the polling had Clinton ahead. I maintain that the demographics should favor Clinton. So how did Sanders manage to win? Again, my hypothesis is that he got a lot of bleed over from Trump voters who went to vote for Trump but voted for Sanders while they were there. Because you can do that in an open primary. It's kind of crazy, but I mean, you don't have to cross over from one side to the other. You can vote twice. And it's going to be the same thing in West Virginia, where you can vote for both candidates. But now that Trump has won the nomination, everybody's out. Trump is telling people not to bother voting for him. I think that that's going to harm Sanders because he's not going to get the same kind of boost from that, right? We'll see. But the flip side of that is to watch for turnout on the Republican side. Because if there's big turnout anyways, lots of people show up to vote. All the independents. You could actually get a secondary bleed effect. But I think that, well, this is the way to test for it, right? If you notice from this point on that Sanders' support goes down substantially, then you'll know that a lot of what you were seeing in some of these upsets in these open primary states is that Trump voters were throwing them a quarter, sort of thing. Listen, I don't like these analyses, this late in the game like this. I was rooting for Sanders, but I'm not going to make things up. I frankly don't see the numbers in front of me that suggest a Sanders win in West Virginia. And like I say, if it does turn out the other way, if Sanders does win, then I think that's very ominous for Clinton. Because it suggests she's getting beaten by Trump in the South. And a lot of the talk about her winning some of these states may actually be premature. Or to put it another way, if Clinton wants to win the election, and if all of these, projections of these huge Clinton wins are accurate, she'd better win in West Virginia. If she can't win in West Virginia against a communist Jew, she's got some problems.